So let me just by starting to thank Patrick for the introduction and Nakajima for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. Let's see how it go down here. Okay, a few words where I'm coming from, so it will help you more understanding the content of my presentation. I work for APB, the Association of Pharmacists in Belgium, which is the National Federation of the Professional Associations of Independent Community Pharmacies. And depending on the country you are from, you will know that in every country, this type of professional organization exists. In Holland, that would be KNMP. In Germany, that would be ABDA. In France, that will be l'Ordre des Pharmaciens. So that's more where I'm coming from. And we represent almost all independent community pharmacies and more than 85% of all community pharmacies in Belgium. You can read our mission, which I put up on the screen. We support, develop, promote community pharmacist added value to the benefit of the patient's health. And we are Brussels-based with a staff of about 120 people. And 1/3 of these 120 people work for our Medicines Control Laboratory, which is an important activity for almost 70 years, where APB has taken the initiative to organize this Medicines Control Laboratory, mostly to do post-marketing quality surveillance of medicines on the market. So quality control of medicines on the market has been a focus of APB for 70 years. Just another point of view when talking about personalized pharmacotherapy, well, actually, it's not new. I have the impression we're having a revival last 10 years, more or less, but has been around almost for a century. And the way we have been personalizing pharmacotherapy within the community pharmacy and also in hospital pharmacy, for all that matters, is compounding. Compounding medicines has always been around. It started because in the early days, there basically were not any branded medicines available. So pharmacists needed to compound medicines. But still today, we compound, pharmacists compound, produce medicines within the pharmacy premises to adapt to individual patient needs or even preferences. It's a production that is taking place very close to the patient, which has some advantages. Speed is one of them. So pharmacists can react very quickly to changing needs. Of course, we as pharmacists, we dispense medicines with appropriate pharmaceutical care. It's not an alternative, but it's just a complement to manufactured medicines, which of course have been around since in Europe and since they were regulated in the early 60s and produced following GMP standards. We like to say that manufactured medicines are always one size fits all. Actually, they're not. We see different sizes, we see different dosages, we see different formulations, different routes of administration. So today, physicians do have some choices when prescribing or choosing a therapy while talking to the patient. But they're usually produced far from the patient, which means we still have this geographical and time lag before the medicine reaches the patient. What is equivalent to compounding medicines is the dispensing process. So pharmaceutical care is just the same, whether it be manufactured medicines or compounded medicines. When we look at pharmacy compounding, we see that today it's still popular. Not in every country, but in most countries, it's still popular and very much needed in community and hospital pharmacy. And if we look at techniques that are used to compound medicines, luckily they have evolved over time. Whether it be sterile compounding in these types of laminar airflow cabinets, or whether it be non-sterile compounding, using sophisticated weighing scales or sophisticated semi-solid mixers. Luckily, techniques have evolved over time to produce better and safer medicines for patients. But what about solid oral dosage forms? For pharmacists in the audience or online, of course, they know this. For the non-pharmacists, typically solid oral dosage forms are made by capsules. That's just weighing powders, mixing in a mortar, and then opening capsules in this kind of capsule filling machines, pouring the powder or dispersing the powder over the capsule halves, and then using this machine to close the capsules. That's the way I was taught when I studied pharmacy back in the 90s of last century. And still today, that's the way that most solid oral dosage forms are produced. And looking at this technique, I realized that actually this one has not evolved that much over time. And I did a little bit of research when preparing for this presentation, and I found this very old patent, which dates to 1905, so 115 years old, where somebody already patented a capsule filling machine to be used to open and close capsules. And as in the image on the left-hand side shows, this is a gentleman, I think from the 20s or the 30s, who is just doing the same thing, mixing powders in a mortar, crushing it with a pestle, and then filling it over empty capsule shells and closing the capsules. So this is a technique that still hasn't evolved that much, still very useful, but might have some drawbacks or shortcomings. Let's zoom in to pharmacy compounding, typically for the country I come from, Belgium. All 4,700 community pharmacies compound medicines on a daily basis. Some of them maybe only one medicine, other ones maybe 10 or 15 medicines. And there's a particular focus of my organization, APB, on the quality control of compounded medicines. Contrary to GMP-produced branded medicines, quality control of the possibilities for pharmacists to do quality control of compounded medicines is more limited. And we have some quality programs in place which help pharmacists to check or to make transparent the quality of the medicines they compound. So the research question we typically asked us late 2019 was if 3D printing could be a valid alternative to the classical pestle and mortar mixing of powders and filling capsules. Now, APB is not a typically academic research institution, so we needed to get some help from research laboratories from Leuven, Ghent, and Liège, which are 3 Belgian cities with very nice universities. There were some things we did as APB, and that's using a famous quote, which was not invented by me. That's to start with the end in mind. The end in mind being a possibility or a methodology where community pharmacists on the scale of their community can 3D print medicines for the patients they serve in their community. Having that in mind, within all the printing techniques available, we quickly landed on FDM, fused deposition modeling. The reasons are very clear, I think. Printers are desktop size, they fit in a community pharmacy, they're very affordable and very available. They're easy to program, they're quite flexible in what the possibilities are. And when used on a pharmacy scale, meaning serving anything between 1 and 15 patients a day, they seem to be cost and time efficient. So this was some criteria we took into account in the very early phase of our developments. But of course, if you use an extrusion-based printing such as FDM, we need to have drug-loaded filaments. We need to have research to choose the right polymer, to test mechanical thermal behavior of polymers and drugs within these filaments. Typically, this is not something that we see happening within the community pharmacy. So filament production should be done outside the pharmacy. And this is just the same thing with us at APB. We don't produce our own filaments. We need to use filaments, and that's why we have produced by university laboratories. Other things we considered when looking at the end, where pharmacists are producing on a local scale for the patients they serve, that's just looking at size and shape. What would be acceptable to patients? And we did that with our own staff, because we're all patients as well. We're not only pharmacists, but we're patients as well. And we quickly realized that these typically cylindrically shaped tablets are maybe not that acceptable to patients. So we took some 3D models of different possible tablet-shaped platforms and try to print them to find some acceptable shape, looking a bit like the tablets that patients recognize today from the commercially available medicines. And then tested these and checked if our printers were very happy to print them or not. And these are just some examples. First, of course, with just PLA, and then with a drug-loaded filament to have some acceptable size and shape. Once we got that, we saw what can we do with them? What kind of tests can we offer on a community pharmacy scale, knowing that destructive quality control is probably something a community pharmacist will never do. But what it can do, and it can be a proxy for quality control, that's just looking at dimensions of whatever is printed and looking at reproducibility of dimensions, whether it be the length of a tablet, the width of a tablet, or the height of a tablet. And closely linked to that, of course, is the mass distribution. How repeatable within a day or over different days is the distribution or the repeatability of the mass of some printlets. And this is just with some model compounds of a theophylline-loaded tablet. Again, typically applying criteria as we know them from tablets from European pharmacopoeia. We as pharmacists, we think we live pharmacopoeia, so we just use some typical criteria that are described for tablets, which is a solid oral dosage form closest to what we print. If we want mass distribution to be a proxy for content distribution or content uniformity, of course, we need to test content as well. And this is just an example of, again, these model compounds containing theophylline. If on our pharmacy scale, the printing process we're using can give a repeatable content for the active principle. Of course, there's other characteristics we were looking at, which I do not show in my presentation today. That's things like friability, like hardness, again, typical parameters we use when quality controlling tablets. Of course, in vitro dissolution is an important parameter as well, because we want these tablet or printlets, if you wish, to dissolve once swallowed. And this is just typical profiles we were checking when analyzing these theophylline printed tablets. Another very important thing we were looking at when researching is that maybe it will work once with one filament, with one printer in one pharmacy, but actually what we need to look at is the robustness, because as I said, 4,700 community pharmacists, we want the same quality level to be guaranteed wherever the printing process takes place. So we looked at different storage conditions, for instance, of the filament. Do these filament need pre-treatments? Do we need to dry them, keep them in a desiccator, or even in a climate chamber? These are typical things we looked at, and we did see some influence on the way filaments were pre-treated or even more were stored. And this is something very important to keep in mind when in the future these printing processes will take place in different decentralized locations. Another important factor is seemed to be the way that the filament diameter was consistent or not consistent. And the results I've brought with me on this typical, on this example is just filaments with a very small difference in diameter did give quite different results when dosing the active principle in the printlets. And apparently what this learned us that different printer brands or different printer types are more or less forgiving to small variations in filament diameter. Again, very important to keep in mind when setting out quality control parameters for these filaments. So what are we going to use this 3D printing for? I'm not sure, I'm convinced that we'll never replace classical pestle and mortar compounding. It works very well to make 30 or 60, maybe 120 or 300 capsules for a typical treatment regime. But for some instances, this way of compounding is too slow. It's sometimes not accurate enough, or just too much work, or just taking up too much time of your compounding pharmacist, of compounding assistant. And this is just some examples where we think that 3D printing can offer a valid alternative. That's titration and tapering schemes, where you have varying doses, low dose preparations, corticosteroids in particular, which give some quality problems when compounding, maybe combinations of medicines, although we can mix very well different active principles within the mortar and compound that in capsules. And then everything that's slow, extended, or sustained release. Capsules are always direct release, and with 3D printing, we have some opportunities to play around with this release, or maybe have an attractive color or shape or identification, where the possibilities of capsules are more limited. I've brought with me two applications where, together with the universities, we have been looking at. And the first one is a pediatric application, children with adrenal insufficiency or congenital adrenal hyperplasia, where typically the standard of care is hydrocortisone replacement therapy. And what endocrinologists in Belgium are using today is just a selection of direct release compounded capsules with very different doses from 0.5 up to 10 milligrams. And what they tell us is that careful titration is absolutely necessary for these little patients to control androgen access and optimize growth and development. We don't have any existing pediatric licensed formulation in Belgium, so we need to compound them. And hospital and community pharmacists have been doing that for a number of years, but still, it's very important to know that critical dosage the correct dosage is critical. And as you can see in the photo, and if you want to read the paper, I've put the reference there. There have been some issues with substandard compounded hydrocortisone capsules, which is just a mistake of the pharmacist. The filling of the capsules was not done according to protocol. But still, this puts these vulnerable patients at risk of poor disease control and maybe adrenal crisis. So that's why we together with the University of Liège, are looking today if FDM with a hydrocortisone-loaded polymer could be an option. And research is still going on. I've seen some interesting results for direct release. So maybe if you watch out for publications from University of Liège, you'll soon see some interesting results. In parallel to that, I'm making some publicity for another speaker, distinguished speaker this afternoon, who will talk about a comparable application for sustained release dosing platform for the same type of patients. Another application, and that's, I'm just making the way for the next speaker, is just for adult long-term benzodiazepine or Z-drug users. Belgium has the unfortunate honor to be amongst the top users per capita of these drugs, which are used for a number of as sedatives or as antipsychotics, but also as to use for people with sleep disorders. Just two molecules that are most popular, if I can say so, or mostly used, are lometazepam and zolpidem. But I don't think it's a surprise for the audience. Long-term use is not good. There's potential for harm when people are using these for more than 4 weeks. And a lot of literature indicates that gradual dose reduction is to be preferred over immediate stopping. And there's a very famous scheme from Professor Ashton, which as an indication gives 10% dose reduction every 2 to 4 weeks. Again, licensed formulations, the choice is very limited on the market. So we need to compound or print. And this one is a particular focus for Belgian patients because tapering schemes, so these reduction schemes, will get reimbursed for patients in Belgium somewhere later in this year in 2022. So I'm not giving any details. If you want to have the details, stay tuned because you will have a presentation of Silke just after this one, who will tell you all about this very fascinating case. This is already my last slide. I hope I've shown you how we as community pharmacists see desktop 3D printing not to replace, but as an alternative for specific applications, as an alternative to classical compounding. Not just us, but in general, I see extrusion-based techniques such as FDM sometimes struggle with good release kinetics. So in the long run, I'm not 100% convinced this is the right choice to do small-scale direct release production close to patients. And just as commercially available medicines, no size fits all, we've learned in these 2 to 3 years that there's no standard or predictable solution that fits all compounds. So still development needs to be done, but still I think it's a fascinating field of research. And that's just some people who did all the hard work, which I want to acknowledge. Thank you very much for your attention.